Hello and welcome to PolkaDeFiance, brought to you by Equilibrium, Cointelegraph, and the Polkadot DeFi Alliance. Excited to have you all here today. I'm broadcasting to you live from rainy New York City. Excited to have you all here for an event to learn more about DeFi and Polkadot. Excited to see a lot of people from all around the world. Love to check in the chat and see where everyone's at. I always like to see sort of where the Polkadot community is when we have these events. So we have a really packed agenda today, a lot of great speakers from all across the Polkadot ecosystem. And the first talk is by Eric Wang, Ecosystem Development Lead at Parity, who's going to give you a bird's eye view of the Polkadot ecosystem. So Eric, I'm going to bring you on and take it away.
Awesome. Let me share my screen real quick. Perfect. 1 second. Let me make sure that's working and play. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for showing up to my talk. And as Peter introduced, I'm giving today a bird's eye view of the Polkadot ecosystem. And hopefully by the end of this talk, you guys will know how amazing and awesome the Polkadot ecosystem is. So I'm going to start off this talk by introducing a little bit about the background of the ecosystem and who we kind of consider as people who could build within Polkadot and Substrate. So when we think about ecosystem builders, there's really three main types of categories that we look at. And these are chains, dApps, and as well as infrastructure. So chains generally consist of the things you generally think about when talking about Polkadot. And these are people who are building parachains, parathreads, or chains that act as a bridge to other external blockchains. And for dApps, these are applications that are being built on top of these chains, which are either consumer-facing applications or higher-level protocols. And finally, last but not least, there's infrastructure, which could be things such as tooling, services, and integrations that kind of work with chains and dApps to kind of bring you the holistic Polkadot ecosystem experience. So at the beginning of the talk, I mentioned a little bit about both Polkadot and Substrate. So there's, I like to mention that Polkadot and Substrate, although they are relatively distinct as in terms of technologies, the reality right now is that the parachain ecosystem and the Substrate ecosystem overlap quite significantly. Right now, Substrate is the main SDK that is used to build blockchains as well as used to build, in a sense, applications on top of these blockchains within the Polkadot ecosystem. And currently, there is no, I guess, Polkadot parachain yet that's not built with Substrate. However, in the future, we do imagine that there are going to be a significant chunk, as you can see in this pink part of the circle here, that will be non-Substrate based Polkadot parachains and parathreads. And when we talk to people about how do you build on Polkadot, generally people are talking about how do I build a chain or how do I build an application? And within these chains or applications, there's really kind of five main kind of technical areas that we as Parity would recommend they look at. And these could be things such as independent substrate-based blockchain, a parachain, a parathread, runtime on top of a parachain or a parathread, and then smart contract on top of a parachain or parathread. And what's interesting is that all of these things are not necessarily superior to one another from an objective standpoint, but they all have their own pros and cons. And for example, building a parachain would allow you to have relatively high logic complexity based on what you want to build, as well as a relatively high shared security. And that's why parachains have become kind of so popular as an option for people to build on when they talk about the Polkadot ecosystem. But because there are kind of so many options for builders to actually develop, the Polkadot ecosystem is quite rich, and it's really kind of allowed the ecosystem to flourish the way it is today because different types of developers can develop exactly the kind of application they want to build. And in this section, I'll talk a little bit about kind of trends within the ecosystem, how the Polkadot ecosystem has really evolved today. This can include kind of metrics and kind of numbers of builders, et cetera, and what we kind of see as the roadmap up to this point. So what's really awesome about Polkadot is that at 3 years since our first commit Polkadot has already more developers than Ethereum had at the same point of time. So 3 years after Ethereum was deployed, Ethereum had fewer overall developers than the Polkadot ecosystem has. And I think this kind of speaks to not only the passion of the ecosystem in kind of promoting Polkadot towards developers, as well as to some extent, I guess the flexibility that Polkadot affords, because not everybody wants to just build a parachain or a set of smart contracts on Ethereum. Building smart contracts, I guess, limits you to kind of certain parameters, which I guess doesn't allow you to build the best application possible. And as a result, kind of the increased number of developers, what we also see is an increased number of teams that are building both components for Substrate or Polkadot and teams that are building blockchains with Substrate. And as Substrate was launched around end of 2018 or so, starting Q1 of 2019, for example, there were only like 4 people building blockchains with Substrate. And that number, for example, has increased almost linearly over the quarters. And same with components as well. And one interesting trend that I'd like to kind of point out is that for teams that are building components, by Q4 2020, there were at least 35 components that were fully launched within the Polkadot ecosystem, but only 6 blockchains that are fully launched within Substrate. And what we observe is that this is because most people who are actually building on Substrate actually want to build a blockchain on like a parachain on Polkadot. And so many people choose to kind of, even if their blockchain is ready, they choose to kind of wait until Polkadot network is live until they deploy their parachain. But there are, of course, some teams as well, and these teams number more than 6 at this point, who have already deployed a live Substrate-based chain, and also kind of intend to connect to Polkadot after Polkadot becomes live through what this kind of platform that we call Cumulus. And with the growth of the teams, like within the ecosystem, we also see that efforts in the sense to kind of attract these teams to build have also become quite decentralized compared to before. And so basically until mid 2020, I would say that Parity and Web3 Foundation were actively aware of most of the projects within the ecosystem, and we were in contact with most of the projects within the ecosystem. And that's a result of, I guess, people not knowing quite as much about how to build and not as many people evangelizing really how amazing Polkadot is as an ecosystem just yet. But since mid 2020, that kind of a number of stakeholders has increased quite a bit. So not only are Parity and Web3 Foundation, for example, still working pretty carefully to expand the ecosystem, but also now we have an ecosystem of like investors, such stockholders, as well as other projects that kind of pitch the Polkadot message and the Polkadot ecosystem to other projects. So at this point, for example, Parity probably doesn't even keep in contact with half of probably all projects within the ecosystem. And it just shows that this is kind of a like a step towards the right direction in terms of decentralizing the efforts within Polkadot. And I'd also like to talk about in this slide kind of types of applications that are being built in Polkadot. So what we observe is that there's really Polkadot is really kind of a platform for you to build, I guess, all-encompassing any type of application out there. And we see this basically, for example, in our DeFi, I guess, ecosystem within Polkadot. So back in DeFi summer, we at Parity and Web3 Foundation figured that there's a lot of work that needed to be done in terms of building DeFi building blocks in order for us to have a flourishing DeFi ecosystem. And we were really able to kind of sell the idea of, I guess, interoperability and all the benefits that Polkadot has to kind of make sure that all of these building blocks are out there. But then, like, even though there's kind of quite a large variety of, I guess, for example, DeFi projects within the ecosystem, DeFi and Polkadot only represents about 25% of all projects building. And I think this kind of variety of projects kind of shows just how flexible the Polkadot framework and network is for, I guess, end users as well as developers. And currently, I think the trend is that people are really waiting for parachains to kind of be ready. And parachain teams themselves are kind of really preparing for for this next phase of the Polkadot network. So we're all kind of really excited to see, I guess, which teams end up becoming parachains and how the economics of these parachain auctions go. And there's, as well as what's happening is that there's quite a lot of services, both centralized and decentralized, kind of being built, as well as fundraising being raised to kind of make sure that the parachain teams that the community and the investors want to become parachains actually end up achieving that goal. And so the last section I'd really like to talk about is more opportunities within the ecosystem. And there's kind of two sections within this. So the first part is trends that we've observed in the ecosystem. And second, I'd like to talk about basically kind of the support structures that teams can get if they do decide to kind of build within, I guess, Polkadot and Substrate. So the first trend we see amongst builders is that we expect to see more regional diversity of builders. So this is a really simple pie chart I drew of kind of the regional distribution of builders back in December 2020. So what's interesting to note is that most of the projects that you hear about nowadays about Polkadot is actually probably outside of Europe, I guess, for most of you guys. But still, back in that time, there were 37% of all builders were from Europe. And this was largely because at the beginning, Parity and Web3 Foundation were kind of the main players kind of stewarding this ecosystem. But what we expect to see is not only is Parity and Web3 Foundation's influence going to diminish within the ecosystem in the future, but other stakeholders from all around the world are also kind of able to convince more localized projects to kind of build within those regions. And we kind of already see more attention towards Polkadot in regions such as like South Korea and Japan, India, etc. that just a few months ago really have not had that much kind of activity or knowledge of Polkadot in general. Another trend that we also expect to see is a higher share of projects that are building applications on top of chains as opposed to chains or ecosystem components. One really amazing development, which wasn't really entirely within our prediction, is basically how, I guess, how popular platforms such as Moonbeam, Akala, Equilibrium, like Plasm, all these smart contracts supporting chains will become with regards to kind of public sentiment and level of overall adoption at this point. And so within these platforms, for example, applications can be built. And because there's a limited number of parachain slots, but an unlimited number, well, nearly comparatively unlimited number of applications that can be built on top of these parachains, we expect that these platforms really kind of get quite a large traction within the coming months or so. And that this kind of share of applications will grow significantly from, I guess, a small percentage to a much larger share of this pie chart. And another trend that we expect to see within the coming months is kind of rise of more NFT-related chains and applications. So I just put some logos of, I guess, a good variety of representative, you could say, NFT projects within the Polkadot ecosystem. But what we see is that, of course, outside of Polkadot ecosystem, there's been a huge shift of attention towards NFTs. And what we're already starting to see is that people are realizing that NFTs kind of require, I guess, it would make NFTs way more interesting if NFTs could kind of interoperate with one another, as well as they could kind of be secure and basically not be lost for a while. And being able to kind of build on both the Kusama networks for kind of lower value NFTs and the Polkadot network for really these like $1 million NFTs kind of gives builders as well as end users a lot of flexibility when it comes to kind of choosing like a platform to kind of host their NFTs. And this is definitely going to, this is definitely kind of an area that Parity, for example, is actively trying to promote for people to actually build on. And two more trends that we expect to see is, one is we expect to see like a rise in fundraising and related applications. So as parachains kind of become, I guess, live and the slot auctions are occurring, they kind of need ways to kind of raise these the funds in order to actually secure these slots. And so projects such as like HydraDX, PolkaStarter, and Bounce Certified, for example, are kind of providing certain kinds of platforms for basically people to be able to secure enough funding for their parachain slots. HydraDX, for example, allows projects to continually, I guess, raise enough dots so that they can kind of continue their, I guess, slot exposure over time. And because of kind of the demand for parachains right now, we expect these to be relatively widely adopted in the coming months. And also, finally, we expect to see a really kind of a really good shift towards Polkadot native yield farming. Really, we can see the rise of DeFi summer in Ethereum is largely attributed towards, I guess, this idea of yield farming. And I think this won't be too much different in the Polkadot ecosystem, especially as many of these DeFi projects within the Polkadot ecosystem are some of the more well-funded and mature ones. Many of these projects may actually launch earlier than other projects as parachains. As they launch earlier than others as parachains, the first set of users may also kind of go into these DeFi projects. And these projects can be things such as like Equilibrium, Macala, Staffy, etc. And finally, the last slide I have is basically going to discuss, if you are a builder, talking about how much ecosystem support you can get if you choose to kind of build within the Polkadot ecosystem. So just within technical support, there's kind of many programs that you can choose from to kind of support your project. And these could be things such as the Substrate Builders Program, which is now kind of seen as by many people within the community as this premier program for some of the higher caliber projects within the ecosystem to kind of get various types of support. I mean, not just technical, but also community support, fundraising help, and kind of messaging support. There's kind of development efforts from Parity to make sure that certain projects are able to kind of get the right development support in the form of substrate delivery partners. There's quite a few funding opportunities within the ecosystem, both kind of off-chain and on-chain. From an off-chain perspective, the Web3 Foundation grants is relatively well known and has granted over 100 projects within the last year, and it's expected to kind of grant quite a few projects this year. And what's even more interesting, I think, is the on-chain treasury, which has funded a decent number of projects to this date. But one amazing thing about the on-chain treasury is that it's, one, decentralized, two, it funds pretty much any type of project that the council would approve, and three is that the treasury side of this the size of this treasury will increase over time. So as you can see in the graphs to the right, by August 2021, the size will be over $300 million US, and could really fund quite a few different types of projects there. And there's also, of course, a ton of community events, as, for example, like this Polkadot DeFiance event is hosted by community members, as well as events hosted by either Parity or Web3 Foundation in the form of things such as Sub-Zero and Web3 Summit. We have a really good Polka ambassador program with quite a few ambassadors globally. And so if you're kind of an individual who's looking to evangelize the Polkadot ecosystem, as there's just so much stuff going on, I definitely recommend you check it out. And finally, last but not least, there's quite a lot of venture funding opportunities for projects within the ecosystem, both from the VC side as well as accelerator incubator side. And as you may know from excellent projects that are speaking in this talk, such as Refinance or Equilibrium or whatnot, there's been a lot of kind of investor activity and attention towards Polkadot ecosystem in general, especially the, I guess, higher caliber ecosystem projects that may be speaking today. And hopefully now that my talk is completed, you guys think that the Polkadot ecosystem is amazing, and I hope that the subsequent talks will really kind of elaborate on that as well. Thank you so much for listening to my talk.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Eric.